The Mughals were a Timurid dynasty that ruled most of South Asia from about the 16th century to the 19th century. They were descended from Timur Ilang and the Mongols, but were also mixed with Persian and Rajput bloodlines. They ruled most of South Asia, stretching from Afghanistan to Bangladesh and from Kashmir to the Deccan for most of these 300 years, and remained one of the preeminent states of South Asia throughout this time. They were called the Mughals by contemporary Persian and later accounts, but they themselves referred to themselves as the Gurkani because Timur Ilang was a son-in-law of a Mongol prince, and therefore he considered his dynasty to be descended through that bloodline. But the Mughals themselves saw themselves more as an elite Persian Timurid dynasty rather than Mongols. They wouldn't have called themselves the Mughals. Depending on the definition of the word empire, the answer can change. For example, the dynasty itself, the family, existed from 1526 when Babur conquered a state within India by defeating the Lodhis of Delhi, up until 1858 when Bahadur Shah Zafar was tried and convicted by the British and then thrown out of India, and the dynasty was declared extinct. But if we think of it as an empire, as a state like that, then we can say it existed from 1555, around the time when Padishah Akbar came upon the throne, and ended around 1739 when Nadir Shah attacked Delhi and sacked the city and destroyed the foundations of the empire itself. And then it existed as one among several small states in North India. Its power as the imperial state had died by then. So roughly that 150 years is when the Mughal Empire existed. For one thing, the Mughals never conquered India, because India as a country never existed at the time. They conquered the state of Hindustan, which was controlled by the Lodhi Sultanate at the time, which was one among the many different states that existed in the Indian subcontinent. And the Mughals never managed to capture all of what is today India, or all of what has been historically the Indian subcontinent. They captured the Delhi Sultanate state of Hindustan with the use of several different techniques. One among them was their use of Ottoman or Turkish cannon fire, which was pretty new to India at the time, India being the subcontinent. They used their heavy cavalry in better ways than the Lodhi Sultans could use them. They used the battlefield to their advantage, for example, by creating a bottleneck. So several different tools were used for the conquest of Hindustan by Babur, including superior military technology. That's almost impossible to say, because the criteria defines what you mean by best and worst, and these are people, so it's subjective. So depending on your perspective, different people can be the best and the worst. If we are talking about the Mughals as a whole, then one of the best Mughals would be Jahanara Begum, and one of the worst would be one of the later Mughal kings, not even emperors, after 1739, who I don't even care enough about naming them. But if we're talking about the great emperors, as they are called, the six great emperors of the Mughal dynasty, by general consensus, the best one is considered to be Akbar, who was the third Mughal Padishah, and the worst one is often named as Aurangzeb or Alamgir, the sixth one. There are valid arguments to make on both these assumptions. Me personally, I don't choose either of them. This is an argument that has been brought up fairly often recently, comparing the Mughals to the British, and I think it's a flawed argument. For one thing, the British were a colonial power, which means that they were a foreign power that used resources within India to better their own prospects back home in England. The Mughals, on the other side, were a foreign power that came into India and then established themselves within the confines of historical India and ruled within India, and all the resources that were utilized were used for the betterment of the state within India itself. So nothing was taken out of it and then taken to a different part of the world, so that it wasn't like a vampire sucking blood of a victim. It was just a state that existed within India. They were of foreign extraction in the beginning, but they were primarily an Indian state that used Indian resources and technologies for India itself. So they were not a colonial state. Unlike most dynasties in India, the Mughals were an extremely itinerant family, so they did not have just one single capital like the Rashtrakutas had Manyaketa. The Mughals tended to travel around a lot, and wherever the court went with the king was where the capital was. That's where the empire was centered on. But for imperial cities, their primary imperial city for most of their history up until the reign of Shah Jahan was Agra. That's where they were settled most of the time. But Lahore was also an important imperial city. And then Burhanpur eventually became another imperial city during the Deccan campaigns. But during the reign of Shah Jahan is when Delhi re-emerges as the center of imperial identity in India, when he built the city of Shah Jahanabad, which is today Old Delhi. And it's that connection that really settled Delhi as the great capital of India, association with the Mughals. While Delhi existed as the Mughal royal capital for the most amount of time in the Mughal Empire's history, they were an itinerant family and dynasty, so they traveled around all over their state. And wherever the court went with the emperor was where the capital was at any given time. Having said that, for imperial cities, Agra retained the most importance during the earliest period of Mughal administration. Lahore was also another favorite imperial city, particularly during the reigns of Jahangir and Akbar. And then finally, Shah Jahanabad was created by Shah Jahan, the fifth Mughal emperor, and it remained the imperial capital for the rest of the Mughal Empire. And thus Delhi re-emerged as the center of Indian imperial identity, which is why again it became the capital of British India and then the Republic of India. It is this association with the Mughals. I'm assuming the question is about who are the contemporaries of the Mughals. Within the Indian subcontinent, in the earliest stage, the Vijayanagara Empire was still the dominant power, with the Deccan Sultanates coming in a little bit later, until the Mughals then emerged as the dominant power within the Indian subcontinent for the 17th and early 18th century. Around the world, the Tudors of England were the biggest power in England at the time. For example, Queen Elizabeth I, Henry VIII, this was that period. And then the Stuarts came into power in Middle East and that area. The Safavids were in power in Iran and Persia. The Ottoman Empire was the dominant power towards that direction. And in China, it was the Ming and then the Qing dynasty who gave China their name, who were the supreme powers in that region. This is also an interesting time because this is when white people first come to North America and set up the United States and Canada. The Mughals lived during a very fascinating period of world history. This was the period when there were a lot of centralized, powerful empires in the world. For example, within India, the Vijayanagara Empire was still the greatest power when the Mughals first come, and then the Mughals took over as the greatest powers in India during the 17th and early 18th century. In China, the Ming dynasty gave way to the Qing dynasty, who then gave their name to the nation of modern China. In Europe, the Tudors were powerful in England, for example, Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. Then came the Stuarts, who then started exploring towards North America and thus created Canada and the United States. So it's that period. And then the Ottoman Empire was the supreme power in Eastern Europe and that part of the Levant. And of course, the Safavids were the top power in Persia at the time. Very interesting period. The most straightforward answer is that a lot of what we take for granted has been provided to the Indian subcontinent because of the Mughals. For example, a lot of the Mughlai cuisine, the biryanis, the samosas, a lot of Persian cooking came to India and settled because of the Mughal hegemony over a lot of the Indian subcontinent. The Hindustani language itself, meaning Urdu and Hindi, evolved and developed because of the Mughal hegemony. Trade and infrastructure and crafts and such were able to evolve and solidify and thrive because of the expanse of the Mughal state and the ability to move resources around this huge state without cumbersome borders and such. They've also acted as a bulwark against foreign invasions. Europeans never managed to take over India during the Mughal administration. It was only after the Mughal Empire fell that Europeans were able to use that to their advantage. So the list goes on if you look for the answers. The idea that the Mughals hated Hindus is a more modern construct and it's not historical fact. For example, most of the Mughals, especially the imperial period, were born out of Rajput wives. For example, Jahangir and Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb were all significant percent Hindu by birth, and the daily customs, their food, their cuisine, their lifestyles, their festivals, these all revolved around extremely Hindu rituals and ways of life. So what we call the Hindu religion did not exist in the way that it exists today then, and the identity also did not exist the same way then. And again, the Mughal administration paid a lot towards maintenance of temples within their realms and only destroyed temples constructed by their opponents or kings and dynasties that displeased them in some way, and as a tool to delegitimize these rulers. They never went against their own people because that is stupid. And if you look at history, you will find that they did not actually hate Hindus. On the surface of it, the answer is fairly simple because to the ordinary person, it didn't matter who was on the throne in Delhi, far, far away. To the ordinary person, it mattered when it rained, when the crops were successfully harvested, how their everyday rations were provided, if they were able to afford food, if their daughter's marriage was successful. These were the concerns of the average citizen. And this is a time when, unlike today, more significantly, people thought that the dynasty at the top were ordained by the gods to rule them. So they were more deferential towards these people. And they wholeheartedly believed in the concept of the divine right of kings, especially in places like India, where dynasties were thought to be legitimately ordained by gods to be the protectors of the people. So everything they did was, in fact, right and just, and you had to follow them and you had to worship them and you had to submit to them. And we see that even in the United States today, so who are we to judge?